got an espresso frappuccino from Starbucks, and it was $6. Actually, $6 and change. So I think it's safe to say that Starbucks recently had a price hike, which really sucks. Hello everyone, it's Leah Cooper here, and today I am bringing you a Top 5 Wednesday. This week's topic is Top 5 Children's Novels. So at first, I really struggled to come up with these books, but then the more I started thinking about it, the more I was kind of poking through Goodreads, the more I started to remember all of the really amazing children's books I read as a kid. Caveat, a lot of these, in fact, I think maybe all but one of these, I have not read since I was a kid. So if I went back and read them now, would they be as great? Well, setting aside the fact that I'm an adult reader, because, I think adult readers can totally enjoy children's books, but maybe sometimes not always to the same level as we enjoy them as children. But I can't speak necessarily for the quality of the way social, cultural, and racial issues are handled in any of these books, because quite a few of them are from the 90s. Some of them are even older than that. And it's sometimes a mixed bag. Recently I saw, for example, Kitty G read Oversea Under Stone by Susan Cooper and reviewed it, and she had a lot of, not positive things to say about it due to the way it handles racial issues, which I read that book as a child, probably in 3rd or 4th grade. In my memory, I freaking loved it. It's one of my favorite books, but I recognized that I was not anywhere near as a critical reader then as I am now. Obviously, there's a big difference between being 27 and being 7, right? So it really kind of highlights this issue of recommending things that you loved as a child as an adult when your worldview has developed so much. So that caveat aside, here's my list. Also, unfortunately, I do actually own, I think, physical copies of most of these books, but they're all pretty much in storage. So the only one I have a physical copy of that I can hold up is number 5, and that's Say Braille by Garth Nix. Now, this is kind of YA. I recognize that. But I think this actually is more of a transition book from longer middle grade and early YA. I think a young, I'm not going to even say an advanced middle grade, but maybe a little bit more advanced middle grade reader would have no problem reading this. My copy is really thick, but the words are really big. It definitely has the text size of a middle grade book. And oh no, I lost my Post-it note. That was actually marking a quote I really liked. Crap. Okay. Anyways, so I totally think this is a really good transition novel. I also think this is a really good starter for introducing young readers to high fantasy, because this has a lot of elements of high fantasy, but it's not anywhere near as dry or mature, obviously, as a lot of high fantasy. You'd never give Game of Thrones to a child, but you could totally give kids this, and it, has a lot of the same elements without the sex and gore. I lied. I totally have another one of these books. Along those same lines is His Dark Materials. This is the first book in that trilogy, The Golden Compass. I think, ironically, this is probably reading this, the language in this always felt the most dense. I think The Subtle Knife is easier to read. Maybe that's just because it's more action-based, but there's a lot of action in this too. Irregardless, I think this is, again, a precocious young middle grade reader could totally read this series and love them. A teenage reader could totally read this series and love them. Adults obviously totally read these and love them. I love them. I really wish that I had read this series as a child instead of The Chronicles of Narnia, because there's actually a lot of really objectionable stuff. Looking back on them now, I freaking loved The Chronicles of Narnia when I was a child, but looking back at them as an adult, there's a lot of themes in those books I don't like and I don't agree with. And I wish I hadn't internalized as a child, and I wish I had read this stuff instead. So this is number 4. The third book on this list is going to be The Two Princesses of Bomar by Gail Levine, I think is her name. I didn't double check before I sat down and do this. She's the same author who wrote Ella Enchanted, which was an extremely popular book, but The Two Princesses of Bomar I actually always really enjoyed more. And it's one of the books that I want to eventually reread to see if I still love it. It's about two princesses, two sisters, in a kingdom. That's all I remember. and the romantic interest, though he's not really a romantic interest because it never like goes there, but like obviously it's a romantic interest. His name is like Reese. That's all I remember. But I remember really loving the friendship and like the sisterly friendship between the two princesses. I really, really loved the journey. I remember distinctly loving the end. Like I was so invested in how it was going to end, and I was so like concerned when I was reading it. I don't know. I probably should have looked up a synopsis. I just remember really freaking loving this book. Along those same lines, I actually really enjoyed Ella Enchanted too. I read that as well. I just didn't enjoy it as much. But I think in general, both of these books are just really great girl-centric fantasies. And I really hope that they stand up to a reread now that I'm like thinking about it. Number 2 is the Black Stallion series by Walter Farley. This is a really old series. Well, really old. I actually don't know when it was published, but it was old when I was reading it. For example, when I was reading it in the late 90s, a lot of the books were out of print. But it's about a young boy. He's on a ship with his father. They're traveling somewhere, and there's a storm, and he gets swept off the ship. He washes up on an island with not a wild stallion. It's a stallion who was also being transported on the ship. And he befriends and like he doesn't tame. They form a bond. Okay. Like total horse fantasy books, but they're so good. And the Black Stallion is obviously like the fastest horse ever. And there's all this stuff about training him to be this racehorse and proving that he's the fastest horse. And in subsequent books, travel back to where the Black was born and all this sort of stuff. Culturally, I don't know if the books could hold up now because there's a lot of stuff about Bedouin tribes, and I don't know how like delicately that's actually, or like accurately that's actually handled because I was reading them as a child. But I remember loving them, and I just love the relationship with the boy and the horse because I was a horse kid, right? I loved them, and I loved the ending. There's like kind of this cataclysmic shakeup of the world in the very last book. Like there's this massive earthquake, and I just remember Alec and the Black are like kind of on this cross-country journey because of this drastic upheaval. It was kind of like dystopian-ish. And then I think Walter Farley died before he was able to finish the series. Yeah, his son ended up like writing more books in the series, but I don't know if you can hear the crows who have come back. I don't want to close the window because it's gonna get so stuffy in my office. But anyways, like any famous series where the son keeps writing the father's books, I'm not a big fan of that. Frank Herbert's son did the same thing, and I won't read those either. Number 1 series has to be Redwall by Brian Jakes. Freaking love these books as a kid. They're so epic. Again, this is another series that's I think really good if you have a kid who likes fantasy, and it's kind of like an introduction to high fantasy. Again, a lot of high fantasy concept battles and like exposition and tons and tons and tons of world building, tons of characters, puzzles, mysteries, journeys, just like everything. These books have everything. I'm trying to think if they like they really don't transition to YA. They're really like a middle grade series, but they're so good. I love them. I have not read all of them. I stopped reading after Taggart Rung just because I aged out of reading them. But some of my favorites were, Martin the Warrior, Lord Brocktree, the original classic Redwall, Legend of Luke, which is beautiful and heartbreaking. So this is the funny thing. I read a ton of series when I was a kid. I really don't like reading series now. I'll read a trilogy, but I really don't like reading a series. Weird, right? Irregardless, here's a couple of more middle grade children's series I really loved as a kid. Starting off, Anne of Green Gables. Not a fan of the later books, but the first 3 I think were really good. Now, I'm not necessarily an Anne and Gil shipper. I was when I was a kid, but like as an adult, I'm not a huge fan. I actually ship Anne with Diana now, like as an adult, because I really like, retrospectively looking back, I really think Diana was a lesbian. I don't remember if she had a happy marriage in the books or if that was just kind of like a movie thing. But irregardless, I did really enjoy like the first couple of these books. When Anne goes away with her teaching thing, they started to drag. After she and Gil get married, they definitely start to drag. And like the last one with her daughter, really wasn't a huge fan of. But First couple, love, classic. Another series that I freaking loved was actually I don't know what it's called, but it starts off with A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle. Again, I don't think I've actually read the last couple of these. I know I own one of the later ones that I have not read for sure, but the first three I distinctly remember reading and I love them. Are there 4 siblings? There's the oldest daughter, the youngest son, and then the twins in the middle. I think that's the kids. So there's this oldest daughter and the youngest son. The youngest son is kind of a strange kid. He's somehow connected to like magic. And then they also have this dog. They have a Newfoundland dog, which I loved. And then there's this neighbor kid. And somehow they all get mixed up in like possibly angels / aliens. There's an alternate world. Like they go to another planet, I'm pretty sure. And there's like space travel or time travel or interdimensional travel. But there's also like fantasy elements. It's been a really long time since I read them, but I really loved them. I love kind of the mishmash of like genres that was going on. I really loved the characters who I cannot remember their names. The youngest son especially is really an odd, quirky, really cool kid. It's a terrible summary. Anyways. And then the last honorable mention I really want to mention, and this is a little cheesy, but it's the Jedi Apprentice series. So this series is by Scholastic. Again, it was coming out, must have been the late 90s. Okay, Phantom Menace was 1999, so it must have started around 1999 and then gone into the early 2000s, like 2002 or something. I remember reading them in 6th grade, and I was probably a little too old for them then. I mean, they are really short books. They're about a very young, like 12 or 13-year-old Obi-Wan Kenobi being taken on as Qui-Gon Jinn's apprentice, and then their adventures leading up to the events of the Phantom Menace. And I was a huge Star Wars nut as a kid, and I actually really freaking loved the Phantom Menace. I saw it in theaters multiple times, I'm pretty sure. I still really like it. Sorry. Like, yeah, there are bad things in it, but I think of the prequel movies, it's actually the best. I'm just gonna say it. And Jake Lloyd, the kid who plays Anakin Skywalker, I don't think is the worst part of that movie. Yeah. Okay. Controversial stance. Controversial moment over. Irregardless, I really liked the Jedi Apprentice books when I was reading them. If I read them now, I'd probably be just like... you could probably read them in an hour or less, and they'd be really cheesy. But I loved them as a kid. They were fun. They're totally like young... middle grade reader appropriate, like especially if they love Star Wars or the Clone Wars, that kind of stuff. They're kind of a series that I wish I owned because I would definitely lend them to my nephew. My nephew does actually like the Clone War animated series a lot, but I don't own them, and I don't think my sister owns them either. But yeah, they were great. They were just fun. They were little adventures and about a kid grown up as a Jedi. And I really appreciated them. That's my list. Let me know some of your favorite middle grade books, or if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned. And I'll see you guys all in my next video. Bye.